Yep, I'm ready to go. Welcome everyone to Only the Lowest Cost Oil and Gas Producers Will Survive, a webinar from Finboot and Repsol. My name is Geoffrey Cann, and I'm the host of the session today. I'm also the author of Bits, Bytes, and Barrels, a book about the digital transformation of oil and gas. I'm a professional speaker and a former partner with Deloitte. If you've just discovered that you're in the wrong webinar, now is your chance to quietly drop off. But I'd still like you to stay. As you're now well used to, your mics are on mute. And for your convenience, the session is being recorded and the presentations will be made available afterwards. Now, all oil and gas sessions begin with a safety briefing. In my neighborhood, the bears have awakened from hibernation, but in the pandemic, many wild animals are now roaming quiet city streets. And sometimes wild animals are very hard to detect. This is a photo of a black bear that was in my neighborhood just this week, tearing apart a bird feeder. Wild animals are unpredictable, so keep your distance. In the world of commodities, where markets set the price and the low-cost players are best positioned to survive in times of uncertainty, we now are experiencing very uncertain times. Digitization for oil and gas has clearly accelerated in the pandemic. Social distancing alone has taken care of that. In fact, market shocks often trigger lasting change, and of course, this will not be the last pandemic. Many other changes in energy are still underway. The shift to renewables, the EU Green Deal, and the net zero carbon targets that have been announced by Repsol, Shell, BP, and others. Now, there is increased urgency to gain visibility through the supply chain by measuring, monitoring, and managing supply. A key cost driver for oil and gas is that these three chains, the physical supply chain, the financial transactions, and regulatory compliance, are all separate, and yet they need to stay closely aligned. That alignment is largely done by humans, agents, checkers, and brokers, and they're all impacted by the pandemic. Market leaders sense the power of distributed ledger technology to play a role in achieving that alignment, dramatically lowering cost and speeding up the supply chains. Trusted connectivity lowers cost. And today, we're going to show you how. Our goal is that you'll be sufficiently intrigued by what you hear that you'll seek to learn more by contacting the presenters. Now, how will the webinar work? There will be 3 short presentations followed by a Q&A. You can enter your questions anytime using Zoom's Q&A box feature, which you can see on your screen. A short ebook from Finboot will be sent to everyone, and at the very end, I'll be holding a drawing for a signed copy of my book. Now, let me introduce the presenters, aside from myself. First is Juan Miguel Pérez, who is the CEO and co-founder of Finboot. He's an engineer by training, holds a PhD in photonics, and is a digital entrepreneur, and he joins us from Barcelona. And Jose Salinero is the Senior Manager of Innovation and Transformation for Repsol's TechLab. Jose has been with Repsol for over 2 decades and is deeply passionate about transforming the company and the industry. He's based in Madrid. Now, I know you're all nostalgic to travel again, and so to remind you of what you've been missing, please ensure that your table trays are stowed in their full and upright position, your bags are tucked securely under your seat, and your seatbelt is fastened. Now I will take over the screen. Thank you, Juan, for setting that up, and over to me. Share screen, and there we are. Only the low cost survive. Is that coming through, Juan, correctly? I've been through many oil market cycles, and there is but one truth: only the low cost survive. My first downturn was in 1985 when I was working for Imperial Oil in Toronto. The demand for oil is around 40 million barrels per day at that time, but the available supply is around 60, most of it from the Middle East. Now, since all that oil wants to be sold, the market collapses and Brent falls from $30 US to just 10. Imperial Oil needs to cut costs and launches an HR scheme called Career Change Assistance Program, or CCAP. It's a kind of buyout scheme for employees. Staffers call it CCAP, of course, but it's followed by kneecap, and if you don't take it, decap. I am newly married, and in 2 weeks, I'm supposed to transfer to the upstream unit in Calgary, but my transfer falls apart. Oil cycles get very personal very quickly. It then takes almost a decade for prices to recover. And Imperial Oil survives because it moves decisively to keep its costs low and its debt restrained. Now, when they happen, oil market downturns all seem unprecedented, but each downturn is unprecedented in its own particular way. For example, the price spike in 1973 was due to an unprecedented shortage of oil tankers to move the crude to market. The market collapsed when new tankers arrived. In Canada, the industry is facing distressingly low prices since 2014 because of an unprecedented lack of pipelines. Today, in 2020, the downturn is about unprecedented changes in both demand and supply, and the demand problem begins with the pandemic. Many other diseases kill more people each year, but in its short life, COVID-19 is now the fastest growing cause of death and unabated has the potential to be the leading cause of death globally. Here's a short chart showing the number of deaths registered in England and Wales relative to the 5-year average. That's the spike caused by COVID. That's the 5-year average. The health system's impacts are unprecedented and are more like what happens after a tsunami, an earthquake, or a tornado. Government lockdowns have triggered a global recession. Global GDP will be down by at least 3%, according to the International Monetary Fund. In comparison, it only fell about 1.5% in the great financial crisis of 2008-2009. Global GDP is about $91 trillion, and 3% is about 3 trillion, which is, curiously, the GDP of the United Kingdom. Try to imagine a global economic contribution of the entire UK economy simply vanishing in 30 days. I'm already nostalgic for the warm beer. This decline across so many economies at the same time is unprecedented. Recessions mean fewer jobs, less commuting, less construction, fewer flights, lower investment, less of everything. OPEC believes the demand for oil likely fell by roughly 20 million barrels per day for all of March and April. The drop in demand is unprecedented. Job losses in particular are horrific. The International Labor Organization estimates that globally, some 305 million people will have lost their jobs by the end of June. Note how the services jobs in yellow, shown on this line on the chart, have disappeared along with manufacturing jobs in white. If you look at the chart, you can see how they track each other, but rarely do they dip in a concerted way so far, so quickly. This is unprecedented. The livelihoods of 50% of the global workforce of 3.3 billion people, that is, those who toil away in the informal economy, are at risk of complete destruction. This much unemployment this quickly is unprecedented. In response, many economies are attempting to keep the lights on by injecting stimulus dollars into their markets. The Globe and Mail in Toronto thinks the stimulus campaigns will be around $5 trillion, an unprecedented amount. Stimulus money helps keep businesses going when there are no customers, but that does not translate into oil demand. For this webinar, I interviewed the CEO of a fuel delivery business in Houston. His company has a clear eye on the demand for petroleum because he delivers it. This is the chart showing the average daily deliveries in the United States in millions of barrels per day. Deliveries are down a lot. Everything: diesel, gasoline, jet fuel. Now, to understand the supply mayhem, we actually have to step back to 2008. From 2008 to 2018, according to BP, North American oil supply has grown from roughly 13 million barrels per day to 22.6 million barrels. This much growth, this quickly from one basin, is unprecedented. Meanwhile, Russian oil production has barely moved from 12.7 million barrels per day to 14.5. And the supplies from the Middle East only grew from 26.5 to 31.7. North American oil production growth is greater than the Middle East and Russia combined. And it's all flowing to Asia, whose purchases have grown from 26 million barrels per day to 36 in a decade. American oil that is relatively more expensive and technically complex to produce by its heavily indebted companies has taken market share from Middle Eastern and Russian oil that is inexpensive and simple to produce from their state-sponsored companies. Now, this might make sense if that expensive oil commanded a higher price because it was somehow qualitatively better, but it's not. By February of this year, the economic ravages of the pandemic and its impact on oil demand were starting to emerge. Remember, China is both the biggest buyer of oil globally and the starting point for the pandemic. China, the customer, and OPEC, the supplier, could see the impacts of China's lockdown before anyone else. But Russia balks at OPEC's pleas for deeper cuts, so the producers decide to flood the market with oil. Whether the oil supply is a poor decision or a shrewd play to push the Americans out of the market doesn't really matter. Supply surges ahead of demand by 20 million barrels per day and leaving heaving inventories of 1.2 billion barrels of oil straining in storage. The speed of the inventory buildup is unprecedented. Now, the North American oil industry is in great pain. The fracking segment is already under siege because capital markets are increasingly suspicious about the fracking business model and the mountain of debt that these companies have taken on board. Frackers are not low-cost businesses, and many will not survive. Of course, oil price is where the pandemic demand meets the war of supply, and here we can see the effects. The price of oil has fallen 85% within the year, from $70.25 a barrel, Brent, down to as low as $9.12. And in some markets, under some conditions, the forward price has even been negative. This great a fall is not without precedent. It fell further in 2008, from a peak of $139 a barrel to $45, but not as quickly. The pain in the industry is not uniformly shared. 82% of the world's reserves are controlled by governments that are highly dependent on the proceeds from oil sales and are relatively unresponsive to price moves, carbon pressures, activists, and capital markets. They are trimming to weather through, but they're not changing course. Unprecedented global recession, massive unemployment, heroic levels of stimulus, catastrophic demand collapse, heaving production oversupply, colossal inventory buildup, and a dramatic price reset. In a word, unprecedented. Now, there's always oil demand, but with this much market upheaval, only the low cost survive. Yogi Berra once said, "It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future." Well, what facts need no prediction? There are 1.2 billion cars in the world, 300 million heavy trucks, 53,000 merchant ships, 30,000 aircraft, and in the main, they all want to be put to work. There is oil demand, but now there are a great many unknowns. How long will the virus be among us, unimpeded by vaccine or immunity? It takes years for vaccines to be tested and then widely distributed. Will we see a continuous cycle of lockdowns and restarts as the virus explodes and recedes with accompanying oil market contractions? How quickly will the economies recover? It took a decade from the bottom of the 2008 recession for the US to be back to full employment. Will businesses permanently change how they work with a more virtual and online workforce, less commuting, and a reduction in real assets? Will there be greater levels of automation? So far, robots and other digital innovations have not contracted the virus. Digital does not commute. How quickly will the inventories of crude oil and finished supplies be depleted? Inventories want to be sold, and they impede fresh supplies. And will the Chinese government renew its push for electrified transportation to permanently demand its demand curve for oil? China is the only material growth market left. And will OPEC and Russia ever again act in concert to keep expensive US oil in the ground? So will we survive this? With cash now scarce, those with the lowest costs stand the best chance to survive. Wood Mackenzie analyzes the average production break-even cost by basin. And at a price of $20 a barrel and a demand of 80 million barrels per day, the basins to the left here are broadly economic, and those to the right are broadly uneconomic. And the US shale, by the way, is this big gold box. 6 weeks ago, I ordered a set of blackout curtains from Amazon for my home office because the window lighting in my home office was really bad for these Zoom conferences. I would normally have gone to the mall, but they're closed. I applied and received one of those stimulus loans from the government. Normally, I would have had to pay a visit to the bank or to a government office, but banks and government offices now limit access. My in-person training course normally can handle 30 people at a time, but with the pandemic, there's no gatherings. My online course, though, has 600 plus students from around the world, paying in 30 different currencies. COVID-driven digital has radically transformed my work world in just 8 weeks. And it isn't just about Zoom. It's about robots, remote monitoring, and automation of all kinds. It's about collaboration tools like Slack, online shopping, and virtual classrooms. It's about online banking, online government services, and it's about in-country manufacturing of N95 masks. Last week, I spoke with Jim. He's the CEO of a publicly traded company. His business supplies the upstream industry with drilling equipment. They started 2 years ago to transform the product line to incorporate digital innovations, such as remote monitoring and remote control. Now, his customers are demanding products that operate independently without forcing people to have to travel for work in oil or to work in very close proximity to others. It's now clear that the adoption of new ways of working enabled by digital tools is a critical pathway to lower costs. Moreover, it turns out that the digital innovations are the key solution to solving the problems of the pandemic and the cost challenges of the industry. And they've been in front of us now for a couple of years. Those that embrace digital innovations see cost reductions of 20% or more and productivity gains of 20% or more. Some companies, like Repsol, have staked their future on achieving carbon neutrality, which can only be done if work processes that generate carbon are overhauled at the same time solving for the pandemic and for lowering costs. So only the low costs survive, and digital is going to be the way forward. Now I'm going to turn back to Juan, who will provide us with an overview of how ledger technology helps drive costs and productivity gains.
Thank you, Geoffrey, for that introduction and for particularly setting the scene of the current state of the oil and gas industry, but perhaps more importantly of the upcoming challenges that the industry has, right? I think from your remarks, there is one word in particular that keeps sort of resonating in my head, and it's unprecedented, right? We are certainly living some uncertain times, right? And to me, it is clear that unprecedented actions will need to be taken to overcome or to survive this crisis, but potentially even to thrive within this situation, right? I completely agree with your conclusion. Digital innovations are the key solution to the problems of the pandemic and the problems faced by the oil and gas industry. Us at Finboot have certainly witnessed how in the past weeks, in just a matter of weeks, the pandemic has firmly brought digital innovation and digital strategy to the very top of the business priorities. We're demonstrating that in today's world, this is no longer a nice to have, this is an operational necessity. And we will see how structures are shifting, how business are changing the ways they work, particularly bringing on board what is called, let's say, what is known generally as new ways of working, right? I think we're going through the birth of a new digital reality. I like to think so, at least. And we have significant challenges ahead. Your example of e-commerce, right, with your curtains, is certainly a relatable example of digital transformation. But there are many ways in which digital transformation can cause an impact, particularly in the oil and gas industry, right? For example, we can leverage digital tools to help efficiently meet remote working and social distancing requirements. I recently read that inspections are now being executed, are now being done through video streaming, which is something that I think in any other situation would have been unheard of, and certainly proving that they work. I do not see us coming back to site visits for inspections, right? Other examples of digital transformation can be providing employees and stakeholders with visibility over their industrial processes and the raw materials in their production processes, allowing or enabling the traceability of the assets in production across all areas of the business, so from upstream to midstream and downstream. These are many areas in which, again, digital transformation makes a lot of sense, and digital technologies are an excellent fit for the oil and gas industry. Success, however, of these digital strategies is always measured in three key verticals, right? Reducing costs, increasing productivity, and streamlining supply chain processes, right? And these were the questions that we put on the table when we first started working with Repsol, right? Is our solution going to directly address these three key verticals? This is actually a photo of me with some of our team in the Repsol TechLab just outside of Madrid a couple of years ago, as part of this implementation of our solution was going on, right? And let's say the delivery of that digital technology was brought to the Repsol facilities. And again, when we look at how this is going to work, we certainly need a technology that is transparent, that is trusted, and that will allow the collaboration of multiple parties in these complex oil and gas supply chains, right? Blockchain technology certainly ticks a lot of these boxes. A recent report by the World Economic Forum defines blockchain as the best thing to happen to supply chains since standardized containers, right? And this is incredible for us, right? It's an incredible, let's say, a description of what blockchain can do for these industries and the impact that it's going to have in the years to come. I'm also very proud to say that Finboot and the work we've been doing in the oil and gas and aviation industries has been featured in this recent blockchain toolkit by the World Economic Forum. So just to understand a little bit what we do, right, when it comes to delivering blockchain in industrial ecosystems. Sadly or mistakenly, blockchain has been associated with high adoption costs and with huge barriers for entry, right? And I'm here to prove that that is not the case, that is not right, that we've actually created a product, an ecosystem in which the adoption of blockchain technology can be simplified, can be accelerated, and we can focus on delivering value to the customers very quickly as we start small and then scale these solutions in their organizations, right? We do this through a product Finboot has created, a product we call Marco. Marco is a blockchain middleware and an application suite, right? So just to simplify this a little bit, it's basically a vehicle for the delivery of blockchain technology and applications to fulfill specific business requirements, right? And the way Marco does this is by leveraging three key pillars of our product, right? It does it by delivering out-of-the-box enterprise software solutions. So what this means is, forget about the complexity. Marco will create an abstraction on top of the complexity of the technology and actually transform that and configure that into your business processes, into your language, and into something that you can easily operate and interact with it. Marco focuses, and it's a fan of customers' ROI and business value, right? So we are firm believers that implementations need to start small. We need to make sure that the business case makes sense and that we're actually generating a return for the customer before we start scaling those solutions, right? It is clear today that the most successful solutions and the most successful blockchain implementations are those that start small, that focus on business value and scale after that has been validated, right? And then from a more technological aspect, Marco is blockchain agnostic, right? So what we mean by this is that it doesn't matter what the underlying technology is, right? So there are many options when it comes to the backbone of a blockchain application, right? And what we're saying here is there are many ledgers and many protocols, right? But what we've realized is that these technologies, these underlying frameworks, are at risk of being commoditized, right? And we do not want our customers to be tied down to a specific ledger technology, but rather we can allow them, and we want to allow them and their solutions to evolve and to grow as the underlying and the emerging blockchain technology also grows and evolves, right? That's pretty much what we want, let's say, to focus on, providing flexible, easy to use software applications for industrial processes. And in order to make, let's say, this even clearer, perhaps, I will talk a little bit about our biggest success story, right? I will talk about the relationship we've had with Repsol. So Repsol uses the supply chain model within Marco, what we call Marco Track and Trace, which we've white labeled for Repsol as Block Labs. And it's using this for the digitalization and for the traceability of their midstream and downstream supply chain processes, right? So what this means is everything that starts at a refinery or an industrial complex, and these samples start a supply chain process through which they are processed or evolved into final products, right? So we are talking fuels, lubricants, chemical compounds, and any other out of the many products that can come out of a refinery, right? Now, what we have here and what they all have in common is they have a very complex supply chain, many different touch points. They have the necessity to comply not only with regulation, but also to meet a very high, let's say, degree of quality for their customers, right? And all of this comes around or comes about through a process of certification, of analysis, that again is all part of that complex supply chain, right? So what we've created, again, is a way so that we can digitize those samples at the refinery level or at the refinery point, at their origin point where their story begins, let's say. And everything that will happen to the digital, everything that will happen to the physical, product will be registered and will be recorded in that digital equivalent, right? So what we get at the end is we get full traceability of those oil and gas products. We get transparency on how those products were manipulated along that supply chain. All of the documentation for compliance, for quality, all of the information behind that asset's life cycle, it's digitally recorded, securely stored in a blockchain ecosystem, but accessible to a very friendly, very easy to use enterprise software application, right? So just a little bit on the way we work, right? Again, what we do is we focus on making sure that every step of that supply chain is covered. As the sample begins its journey and it gets processed, every step of the supply chain is to us a blockchain transaction, right? So we make sure that that digital asset that we're following in its digital ecosystem has in every touch point an authenticated registry of what has happened to the sample, right? Another key value of the technology is that it is capable to integrate with other legacy systems, right? So today, Repsol has integrated in some of the touch points of the supply chain with their SAP systems and with their laboratory management system, right? The value of these solutions and the flexibility that we provide includes the fact that we are actually able to connect or to adapt to different levels of digital capabilities, right? So these supply chains, what they have is they have again, different types of facilities or access to technology depending on the step of the supply chain. So what we do is we can adapt that interface. We can deliver a very easy to use web application that can be accessed by any connected device, a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop or desktop computer, or we can get through more sophisticated interactions, right? Through these ERP systems in those touch points that the enterprise or that the industry has connected. Again, we've been deploying this solution across many industrial complexes in Repsol. Today, we're going through a scaling of that solution across many different facilities in Spain. But our vision with Marco and with Marco Track and Trace in general is to go even farther, right? So this is only one of the touch points, or these are only some of the touch points of that complex supply chain. But in the overall oil and gas industry, there's value to be delivered by Marco by allowing digitalization and by allowing these traceable, trusted ecosystems to be part of the physical, the financial, and the regulatory supply chains that incur or that happen across the entire industry. Again, from upstream to midstream and downstream. And even if we move forward, our vision goes into actually going into the connected sectors. So trying to bring the traceability that we've acquired in the oil and gas sector and bring that value for sectors like the pharmaceutical industry, so that the chemical compounds that come from the petrochemicals and oil and gas industry can actually start being traced into that new ecosystem and into that new sector. Generally, our mission at Finboot, again, is to advance on the delivery of those digital technologies and to facilitate their adoption in industrial ecosystems. And our experience with Repsols certainly proves that we've been able to achieve that successfully, but certainly that we can also, let's say, scale that solution as the satisfaction or the return on the customer side has been proven, right? But in order to go into more details of that, I won't express them myself, but I'd rather take the opportunity that Repsol is co-hosting this session with us and allow you to hear directly from them on what their experience has been in this digital transformation and the delivery of Marco Track and Trace to their facilities. Thank you. Geoffrey?
Thank you very much for that, Juan. And now I'll turn to Jose Salinero to provide us with a indication of how Repsol is approaching innovation, cost, and transformation. So Jose, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Geoffrey. Thanks, Juan, for this opportunity. I'm going to give you an approach based on my personal experience for this project, TechLab, who Juan has explained better even than me, from the perspective of a corporate, an oil and gas corporate. I agree with Geoffrey and Juan. The context, the future is more ambivalent and uncertain than ever, worldwide, and specifically for energy companies, and in the oil and gas is a real critical situation. So Repsol's strategy since 2017 is based on 4 main pillars: technology, talent, digitalization, agile and efficient corporation. That's why Finboot and TechLab has been part of a transformation program who has been leading for technology and corporate venture area inside Repsol, who at the end of the day is responsible for testing new technologies, but also testing new ways of working, digitalization, and is responsible also to offer the company new ways to reduce the cost of our supply chains and other process. No? And why Finboot and why TechLab? Because introducing new challenge to our process through working with a startup has allowed Repsol co-creating with internal talent, and this is very important for us. We have adapt our process to the new technologies through digitalization, and in this specific case, with a very unknown technology for us, at least for Repsol, that was a blockchain 3 years ago. So we have get our goal to reduce, not only to reduce, but our cost, but also improve traceability and immutability of our information and our process. And thanks to this, we work in a new and more efficient approach to achieve our goals. We work in an agile way, and we have introduced in Repsol a new relation with different kind of companies as startup. From the audience, if you work in a corporate, you know, but it's not easy to introduce new ways of working in this kind of companies. We are not specifically the most agile, but when we believe in something, we push really hard to achieve our goals. So from this perspective, our experience, for us, the key factor in 2 ways, in the roles of the people and in the attitude of the people, has been to have a good project leader, a pusher, a believer, and in the first stage of the project, I think it's totally necessary. In this case, has been myself, a great sponsor, something with enough empowerment in the company to help you and the rest of the team to be always enthusiastic in your project and to feel that you have a good support to go to failure without losing your enthusiasm. Okay, you need a process owner. In our case, the sponsor has been from the beginning Tomás Marango. Right now, the director of experimentation and technology support. It's also really important to have a process owner with the technical skills, the technical knowledge, always focus on result, who is always monitoring the advances, and is the responsible to demonstrate that this project with an unknown technology is going to reduce the cost and to reduce the errors and the failures in all the process, because for a lab process, it's very important to reduce the failure. Okay. In our case, has been Miguel Hernandez. Thank you, Miguel, for your effort. And the last one, but not the less important, not the least, the final performer. In our case, has been Alfonso Garcia, responsible to give the final push to the project to finally achieve the goal. Never have to lose the perspective of delivery. It's really, really important for this kind of project. Okay. From the perspective of the key attitude we have observed during the process, our experience showed that the strong leadership, or all the roles I told you before, is really important. But in the transition, they have to care of the people who is going to be involved in the process. The people can break or can make your project. It's very important. You need people with a specific skill and guide to a strong leadership. You need flexibility and agility. You need proper knowledge and skill to do that. You have to change in an agile way, changing your requirement and approach, because you have different scenarios, you have different stakeholders, and you have different stages, moments with different problems to solve. And adaptability, adapt your product. And in this case, I think Marco has been the key product, because he has in their cell, in their origin, this soul. I mean, they always is looking for to be a product who make friendly a very complicated technology, because it's not easy to understand blockchain. You can enter in internet and you can see a lot of videos, and it's not easy to understand. Okay. Courage. If you are not willing to risk the usual, you will have to settle for the ordinary. In a corporate, you have to push, you have to be courage, because if not, it's very difficult to achieve a goal in a disruptive project. And resilience. This kind of disruptive projects are going to find always a lot of stoppers, several stoppers. You always need to have with enough energy to solve it. From my point of view, the TechLab has been the first successful blockchain implementation in the oil and gas sectors. That's for this main reason. Success is going to failure and failure, I repeat again, without losing enthusiasm. For me, this is the most important experience live in this project. I have been involved in this from the beginning. This has been the first step, but for sure it's not going to be the last. Repsol, TechLab, and Finboot are working right now together, looking for new business case to implement blockchain and Marco in our supply chain and another process. I mean, digital identity, audit, etc. I encourage you to believe in blockchain, because for us it's going to be one of the most important disruptive technologies in the next 10 years. And oil and gas sector right now need to reinvent, redesign the projects and the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose, for your kind remarks. And a couple of things you've said really resonated with me. That Repsol sees this technology as a mission critical for the future, even though today it's still very novel and challenging to even get your mind around what it can do. But it's still really, really important. Now, what we're going to do is open up to the questions. There's lots of questions on the chat box coming in. So let's begin first with, this was from Audrey, who's asking about Repsol's commitments to emissions reduction. And so for Jose, what is Repsol's commitment to emissions reduction, and what role does data play in helping to drive reductions in emissions?
Well, I think we are going to have a really commitment with this. I think we are, you mentioned before, the first company who has presented to the audience, to the investor, our commitment to reduction. We want to be to reduce from 2050 25% of our emission. I want to focus on this. Right now, we are designing a new strategy, and for us, it's going to be one of the most important goals for sure.
Yeah. So for Juan Miguel, first question that actually came in was what is the focus of Block Labs? Is it just on refined products, or is it refined plus crude products? And maybe you could also comment on how far the Block Labs could go in the context of the broad supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of Block Labs, today they are using it for both refined and for crude samples, right? And products in processing. So there is some tracing of crude oil as well. From our point of view, from Finboot's point of view, again, what we've created is a configurable solution. So the value of this is you can add as much granularity through your process as you want, and you can add as many verticals to that, let's say, suite suite of products that you're going to be tracing, right? We look at the oil and gas and the petrochemical sector in a very broad way, right? So we do not just want to trace crude oil and refined products. We actually want to continue that traceability as we move on to other sectors, right? So again, a lot of industries use products that come from the oil and gas as raw materials. So we're talking the fashion industry, materials, food,
plastics.
These have these raw materials. So our intention, our objective is to continue that traceability in many verticals, right? And the capacity that Marco has on being very, let's say, well, agnostic is the word, right, to the underlying network, is what will allow us to do this in a very plug and play approach, right, as we connect to multiple supply chains.
Yeah, but from the perspective of a corporate, the most important thing is we have demonstrated that the technology works, and this is the first test. So it's going to help us to scale up the Block Lab.
Now, Jose, you mentioned in your remarks, though, that Block Labs is helping you reduce error rates and eliminate failures. Yeah. Can you touch a little bit around what kinds of errors and what kinds of failures is Block Labs helping you to correct?
In terms of to be generated, at the end of the day, we have automatized the process, and with digital information that Block Lab and blockchain technology allow us to be more confident with the information we introduce in the system. The immutability of the process gives us the opportunity to be more traceability in the analyze. Right. This reduces the time when you have a problem, you know?
Because you can trust the data, yeah.
Yeah, imagine an audit in finance, but it's difficult to go to the first paper, so we have avoid the papers. No, I think Juan has explained before in a perfect way.
Yeah, you avoid having to go back to first principles.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the first question up at the top here. Again, this is probably for both of you, but Jose, can you explain how much effort it is to integrate with legacy systems, this Block Labs? And there's two elements to this. A system is either computer system or it's also a people process system. So maybe you can comment on the people process side. And Juan, maybe you can comment on the computer system side.
I'm gonna let Juan to answer this question.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, on the technical side, again, we've created a product that it's meant to be integrated, right? So all of it, and I won't get too technical here, but all of it is very standard API connections. Even going beyond that, Marco has a very interesting software development kit that will allow enterprises and their IT teams to actually configure and use the potential of Marco and the potential of blockchain technology for their particular business cases in a very straightforward approach, right? In a people manner, I think I go back to the saying that says when there's a will, there's a way, and it is all about again if the organization, which was the case of Repsol, is committed to their digital transformation and wants this to happen, then we will manage and we will configure that very quickly.
Yeah.
There's a sorry, Jose.
Yeah. To reinforce the idea, due to this project, we have awake the curiosity of areas like legal audit, so it's important.
Yeah, just raising attention to the art of the possible makes people think more
something
broadly.
in the air. Something.
Yeah.
Geoffrey, there's a
question from Marta. Yeah, from Marta. Yeah, and I would try this in Spanish. Del Internet de la Informazione a Internet de Valor. How's that?
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
All right, over to you. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, del Internet de la Información al Internet del Valor, ¿qué aportará blockchain en la nueva Internet post-COVID? Just for the English audience, I'll translate that very quickly. So from the Internet of information to the Internet of value, what benefits will blockchain bring to the post-COVID era?
I think both of us can answer this question, but from my side, for us, blockchain could be the main enabled technology to explore new business cases of traceability and digital identity, to reinforce health and safety protocols post-COVID, because things are going to change and are going to change a lot. And we have the opportunity with blockchain to change the process and to be more efficient in general, in all the identity processes, access, traceability of people, etc. I'm sure about it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting close to the bottom of the hour. There's so many interesting questions here. So Juan, for you, how do you link a physical asset like a barrel of oil or finished product to the digital representation of that asset? How is that done?
Yeah, sure. So this is one of the challenges, right? And the way we see it is as a journey. The way we are doing it today is by using QR codes, right? So every physical asset on the origin point gets identified with a QR code. That unique QR code is part of the asset's identity or the asset's data, let's say, that gets traced on the blockchain ecosystem. As that asset moves, the way you, let's say, call information is by accessing that QR code, right? And registering more data to it. We are seeing how this evolves, right? So we are able to start introducing smarter devices, IoT devices or NFC chips, so that we can start strengthening the bond between the physical and the digital, right? But we got to start somewhere. And that's part of the conversation of, again, we can't have all of the pieces aligned before you hit the start button. You start, you're already gaining value. A QR code allows you to manage an ocean of information compared to what you've been doing up until now, and it's not an inflexible solution. It's something that will evolve as we move forward.
Relates to the question or the point, Jose, you mentioned about the need to be agile. Agile means you don't start with a perfect answer from the beginning. You work your way progressively to a better and better and better answer. Yeah. Now there's a question here about, will the working world ever return to normal, or has the digitization work changed forever? And what role would Finboot might Finboot play in this? So, Jose, maybe in the context of your what's happening with the world of Repsol, how do you see the world of work in the future? Has it changed, and will it change forever?
Good question. Not easy answer. In terms of the digitalization, I think it's going to improve the digitalization of all the companies, even more the oil and gas. At the same time, we are going to change the way we work, and certain technologies are going to be very important for this. We are going to need a technology with very flexibility, like Marco, but support by traceability and protection of the information, because the cloud, the digitalization have also some enemies. So I think blockchain and Marco could help us to solve this problem.
Oh yeah, yep. And Juan, are you seeing? I know Finboot's serving other customers. Are you seeing a broader change now beyond current ways of working to be different in the future?
We are, again, I mean, there's a push and there's a clear, let's say, alignment towards we need to be able to have industrial site data at a remote location, right? And that is key. And it's something that some enterprises were aware of before. The pandemic has only made it even clearer, right? And I think, as to finalize the question, what role will we play? Is again, we are in part, we are that driver, right? That vehicle that allows you to have access to that information, secure data, verified data, certified data from a remote location.
Yep, that will be the future. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And now what I'd like to do, sorry, one other point.
So I just want to add one quick thing. I think there's a few questions that we didn't manage to get through, but we did take note of those. If anyone is, again, interested, they can just contact us and we'll make sure that we can address all questions offline.
Yep, use your camera, phone, take a photograph, get the details there. Now, I'd like the screen back, if you don't mind, because we're going to do the book drawing. And let me bring that up. Here we go.